current situation with the war, and the war is getting worse and somehow escalating with the attacks on the infrastructure, civilian infrastructures. And it comes to the bridges in Iran, they hit some bridges, at least 7 bridges around this a city called Bandar Abbas, which is in the southern part of Iran. It's so important for the Iranian Navy because they're using that to control the Strait of Hormuz. That's why they're trying to isolate that city. And the geography is important. To my understanding, it's impossible somehow to isolate that city because of the geography. It doesn't matter how many target you hit, these bridges are somehow complicating the situation, but it's not going to be impossible for them to access the city. And the other point would be the attacks on desalination plants in Iran and in Kuwait. At least they were confirming, both sides, that desalination plants were hit. And we had reports on the power grids, and the blockade is back in the strait. None of these tankers were able to pass through. At least few tankers were passing through the Strait of Hormuz in the last 2 days, and we have at least 5 reports about attacks on tankers or tankers being hit by missiles, by drones, or by mines. This is the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. What is your understanding? What is the main objective of Donald Trump, if there is something like that in his mind?
Well, I don't think there's any rationale for the escalation. It's an irrational move by Trump, but I think it's probably being completely dictated by Israel because from the U.S. point of view, it's illogical. Why would you want to be number one getting into an area that probably is going to invite some war crimes complaints? So that's one thing. And as a result of that, we're also getting tangled up into a situation that we, being the United States, from the U.S. point of view, you're making a lot of international enemies now. In the wider scheme of things, we see that in the international approval of the United States is tanked. It's gone way down. China now has jumped up ahead. The international approval of China is greater at a higher level than the United States. So Trump is making lots of enemies for the United States. So the collateral damage in terms of reputation is enormous that's going on. So that's one cost. The other cost, of course, yesterday there were no tankers. 0 went through, not even one. So the strait is closed, period. And that means that the oil market aspect has to come into play. And this is just driving oil prices up. Of course, they went up a lot last week since they started this bombing campaign. Oil prices are up very sharply, and refined products are even up more sharply. And of course, the cushion we've been using, you have 2 flows that come into the final, shall we say, picture for the market. How does supply come in? Well, it can come in from oil that's been put in inventory, and it comes out of the inventory, and that supplies. And then there's fresh flows that basically come out of the oil that's the crude that's inventoried under the ground and in terms of oil reserves. So the man-made inventory, that has been drawn down to a very low level all the way around. We're talking just about crude oil now. And you can see that because if you look at markets, there's a forward curve, and the forward curve prices the product, the oil, from the spot market for immediate delivery way out into the future for delivery a year from now or 2 years from now. And when that curve goes like this, and the spot price is up here higher than the futures price, the market's in what they call backwardation. And that doesn't happen very often. In the last 20 years in oil, that only occurs about 5% of the time. Now, what does that mean? That means that the inventories are very low and people are willing to pay a high price, a premium for current delivery rather than delivery into the future. So the curve is like a loan market. What's going on when you're short of inventory? You're borrowing from the future and pulling oil into loaning it to the present. And as a result of that, we know that the inventories are very low, and that's starting to be priced in pretty heavily in the oil market right now. It's priced even more in the refined products like gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel because they're even in shorter supply. So why would you be cutting off crude oil with these attacks and driving the price up and doing that backwardation thing when you've already got shortages and low inventories? It doesn't make any sense. So from that point of view, it doesn't make any sense. From the military point of view, my reading on the thing as a non-military expert, but somebody who has some intuition and can read things, it's very clear this isn't going to accomplish anything because Iran will actually probably have a greater stranglehold on the Strait than it had in the past. And we're only talking about one strait. Let's go over to the Houthis in the Red Sea. Right now, some oil is coming out of the Gulf region via Saudi Arabia's oil pipeline that ends up putting oil out, not in the Persian Gulf, but in the Red Sea. And what if the Houthis cut that off, which they might? They're very capable of doing that, by the way. Already the flow of vessels going through the Red Sea has been dramatically reduced. I don't know the exact number today. It's around 50% of what it was, but they could shut it down to zero if they wanted to. The Houthis could. So the U.S. is playing with fire in a losing situation. They're clearly going to lose. So you ask yourself why is this happening? And my conjecture is that they're getting instructions from Israel to keep this thing going. And we know Netanyahu, by the way, is going to be coming to Washington or the United States very soon in the next few days to pump Trump up some more. And very interesting, by the way, Israel, if you read the press, Israel's disappeared. It is not in the Western press. Israel doesn't exist. But in fact, Israel, I think, is calling virtually all the shots. The only one that has any logic behind their objective, which is bad, I think, would be Israel. They want to destroy Iran. They want to wipe it off the face of the earth. So that's for them, having the United States keep pounding away, even though they're involved in things that are probably war crimes. Of course, that doesn't make any difference to Israel. Look at what Israel's doing in Gaza and Lebanon every day. That, by the way, that's not reported either. In the Western press, I report on X the number of killings every day in Gaza, and it's a steady drip of about 5. Yesterday, I think it was up to 14, but it's usually about 5 or 6 being killed every single day in Gaza.
Yeah. Actually, one of the main questions right now is that Israel started this war. Israel, the mastermind behind this war is Israel. But today, nobody's talking. You mentioned the case of Lebanon and Gaza, but with the war, there is no mention of Israel, and Israel is not doing anything. Even though they asked the United States to withdraw its fighter jets or refueling planes from the Ben Gurion, This was mentioned by the Israeli minister in Israel. Then later on, they said no, they can stay there for the time being. Let's see what would happen. But the outcome is that the United States and Iran are fighting something that Israel started, or Israel was the main advocate for this war. Isn't that amazing? And this Arab states, GCC countries, somehow cooperating to. You've mentioned the case of Yemen, for example. Saudi Arabia out of nowhere attacking Yemen and trying to force them to attack. When you attack them and Sana'a International Airport in Yemen, which is you hit the runway, then they're going to respond to you. What is the mindset? What is the calculation on the part of GCC countries? Do they have anything of that sort?
Well, again, I have trouble getting my head around the logic of these actions. So, why, for example, would the Saudis want to stir up things right now with the Houthis when the workaround for Saudi Arabian oil to get out is where it goes to the Red Sea. They were not utilizing that pipeline in Saudi Arabia. Now it's running at full capacity, and so cut off your nose to despite of your face. I mean, it doesn't really make much sense. But I think the spoiler in the picture really is Israel. That's where you've got to go. By the way, if you watch, for example, like even the BBC, but certainly Fox, all the reporting on what's going on in the Middle East, the reporters are all in Tel Aviv. You watch the news very carefully, and all the reporters are in Tel Aviv. That means everything is monitored, and they're getting all their information from the Israelis. So I wouldn't trust any of that news reporting coming out of Tel Aviv as far as I could throw it. You've got to read other sources and try to put the picture together. By the way, you started by saying the war. Well, actually, right now, there's a record level of wars going on around the world. It's 65 now. 65. Now, the two big ones, of course, are in the Middle East and the one in the NATO Ukraine war against Russia, because it is a NATO. NATO's definitely heavily involved in that war against Russia. And this comes into what we were talking about before with especially the refined products, and about 25% of the refining capacity in Russia has been knocked out. And Russia used to be, before, the second biggest exporter of refined products in the world behind the United States. And now it's cut off exports. So when you look at the refined products, even if oil would somehow magically become, the flow would come out of these natural reserves, that if that flow began and you started refilling the man-made inventory that's been depleted, even if all that happened, the refined products markets would remain very tight because the capacity has been whacked in Russia and in the Gulf, because a lot of the refining capacity has been damaged in the Gulf. It's going to take time to fix it. So the idea that these prices are going to come down overnight, it's just a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. So that's another thing leading into the political logic of this for Trump. The political logic, it isn't there. He's playing a losing hand because he's actually elevating gasoline prices, and people pay attention to gasoline prices in the United States. That's an easy thing. You don't have to talk about, forward curves this way, that way, and so forth. People go and fill their car with gasoline a couple of times a week, and they see how much it is. and it's not going down.
Let's assume two scenarios right now. One of them is the escalations as it's going on right now. The two sides attacking each other. It gets finally to the oil facilities. Today, we've learned from the Iranian news agency, which is so close to the Iranian government, they said that if the United States attacks civilian infrastructures in Iran tonight to protect the lives of civilians in the country, which it means in Iran, the airport of Dubai and Abu Dhabi, as well as the ports of Fujairah in the UAE and Jebel Ali in the UAE. Again, they have to evacuate these two ports. Basically, these two ports are important for the export of the UAE as well. And the war, let's assume one scenario, escalation of the war, they hit the oil facilities, and we know, as you've mentioned, the situation with Russia is somehow critical because Ukraine is using these drones hitting the refineries in Russia, which basically you see the shortage. That's why Russia is not exporting, because they're trying to manage the internal affairs in Russia, the situation with their energy domestically. And this is the worst case scenario. How do you see, where does it go, the price of oil? And what would be that point for the Trump administration that says, no, we're done. We're going to do something about it. If you remember, during the war, 40 days of war, the moment Iran attacked the refineries or LNG facilities in Qatar, that was the moment Donald Trump posted, said, we're done. Nobody's going to attack the oil facilities anymore. We're not going to continue with these attacks. Where does that moment today? Because the new escalation are coming, doesn't seem that's going to happen anytime soon.
Well, you're asking a question that assumes some logic and precision, and you can calculate a number. When crude goes to 120 a barrel Brent or something like that, logic is just out. There is no logical thing. I think the whole thing is illogical. So you're asking me to try to sort it out and come up with some logical conclusion, and it's impossible. It's one of these things where the winds of war always have lots of cross currents. So it's always a dicey thing to predict what's going to happen. Well, with Trump, it's like a hurricane. It goes this way, and then it goes that way, and then it goes this way, and it's impossible to tell. Now, one way we could get ahead of it. Now Trump has monetized his Truth Social postings, and if we paid, maybe we should pitch in together $50,000 a piece, $100,000, and we'd get a few minutes ahead of everybody else, so we could fiddle around with the market and trade based on getting into Trump's information earlier. I mean, this is really, you talk about a scandalous thing. I mean, this is really beyond the pale. I mean, the guy's for sale. He's selling everything. I mean, the guy's thanks to being president, he's become a multi-billionaire. Okay, but he never has enough. I mean, he's selling caps and watches and shoes, and it's pretty embarrassing. But if it wasn't serious, it would be pretty laughable. But unfortunately, it is. I mean, we've had scandals in the United States. Of course, all about that down in Brazil, but there's nothing on this magnitude. We had, by the way, and this was related to oil in Wyoming, the famous Teapot Dome scandal. That you can find that very easily. Anyone can Google and find it, or do it on AI. The Teapot Dome scandal was one of the biggest scandals in American history, in all of American history. But it pales compared to what's going on now. It's peanuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this gets into another aspect of what's going on, and that's the legitimacy of democracy in the United States.